What is going on, guys? DragonTamerBlayde here, back from Elder Scrolls Legends, and today I'm doing something a little bit different. Today's video is going to be 10 cards from older sets that I think could gain more popularity or just more usage with the Houses of Morrowind expansion. So some of my, I guess, requirements for that would be, obviously it has to be released pre-Houses of Morrowind, so Clockwork City, Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, Forgotten Hero Collection, Skyrim core set, or the Madhouse Collection. So it has to be one of those things. Has to be a card that did not see a ton of play before. I'm not going to say it has to have seen no play, but either maybe some niche deck uses, some meme decks, or as just say strictly, I guess, suboptimal or budget inclusion in other decks. So has to be an old card. Has to be a card that wasn't used a ton before, and have to be a card that I think we'll see, or could see. I'm not going to guarantee that these cards see more play. I'm just saying, theoretically, these cards could see more play. It has to be a card that would, again, have a more varied role instead of, like, Thorana is a new card, so I think we'll see a ton more Ice Spike. I don't necessarily think that's true. I think we'll just see it in that one deck. So that would not qualify Ice Spike for the list. So as far as today's video, we're going to go over the 10 cards. Kind of just going to go through more informally in the collector or the collection, see kind of how you guys take to videos like these, if content like this is something you're interested in, and for future ones that we do from here on out, if this winds up being something that sticks on the channel, we'll kind of ramp up the production value a little bit, maybe get some nice graphics for the 1 through 10, stuff like that. So without further ado, we'll start, and again, these cards are not in any particular order. So I have 10 cards. I think it's actually 11 cards. There's a tie because 2 of the cards are pretty similar. I'm going to give you just 10 cards in general. I'm not going to say number 10 has the least likely. I'm just going to give you 10 cards. And yeah, that's going to be it. We'll get on into it. I'm interested to see your guys' opinions. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my list. What cards that you guys would maybe include as 10 cards that could see popularity as well. And maybe we'll review some of your guys' inclusions in a future edition of the sideboard. So kind of get some cross-series connections here going. Nord Firebrand is not one. I clicked on that one by accident. So the very first card that I wanted to talk about that I think could potentially see some more play is... Let's pull it up. I probably should just search for it. But Trial by Flame. Trial by Flame, I believe, was introduced with Clockwork City. And the effect is choose a lane, destroy all creatures except for the most powerful creature on both sides of that lane. And I'm coupling that card with Immolating Blast. I think Immolating Blast is probably a little bit better in general than Trial by Flame, but I think with the popularity of kind of rally aggressive decks gaining some momentum with the initial expansion, and seeing a couple other like Dagoth mid-range type of sort of aggressive lists that are kind of putting a bunch of big threats on the board. Board clears and removal are going to become even more important if you're not a deck that's going to be matching that fire with fire. So we have things like Dawn's Wrath that are already really good, things like Ice Storm that are already really good. But if you're playing a 75-card deck and you need to tack in more removal options, you may need to consider running something like a Trial by Flame or an Immolating Blast just to kind of up your percentage chances of drawing some kind of full board removal. I know you could say maybe I was running a mage deck before, and now I add in Endurance to run Tribunal Temple control. Maybe I want to run something for 25 cards from Endurance on top of my mage deck. But that's not necessarily going to be true. 3-color decks aren't always just going to be adding 25 cards from your third attribute. You may want to add some more of these yellow control options that didn't quite make the cut before. But now, although they're not the premium removal like a Dawn's Wrath, or maybe like a Javelin or a Cast into Time, maybe Immolating Blast does make the cut now in some of these slower lists, trying to combat some of these cards that are trying to go wide on the board. So, Immolating Blast, Trial by Flame, card number 1. Next card that I think could be not just better this expansion, I think way better this expansion. It's going to be Keeper of Whispers. I think this card is already a pretty good card that necessarily doesn't always get as much use because you'd only have usually a couple really quality silence targets per match. But now again, mentioning how popular Rally is, We have all of these cards with 5 power matters that have all these very powerful effects. We have just a bunch of very powerful cards coming onto the board in general right now, whether they be buffed by Rally or by other means, or just being like a Hand of Dagoth that has Ward, Breakthrough, and Drain all at once. Maybe you need to remove that effect, or you're playing these cards. You're going to want to be able to prevent them from getting Silence, because I think Silence is going to be... It's already been powerful, but I think it's going to be even more powerful now with the Houses of Morrowind expansion. Keeper of Whispers can be incredibly useful and powerful in terms of protecting your 5-power creatures or your rallied creatures or something like that from being silenced and being removed. And now that we got other silence options like the Lalu Sharpshooter, silence isn't... It's still not easy, but it's going to be more accessible, and I think it's going to be even more powerful. So you're going to want to protect your creatures with stuff like that. And at the very worst, 3-4 isn't the greatest stats, so your opponent can probably kill it, but they have to waste a lightning bolt or a creature doing it, or they have to silence Keeper of Whispers first before they can silence something else. So I think this is a card that could potentially be pretty powerful in the right type of decks that's going to have all of these kind of premium silence targets. So the next card I wanted to talk about is a card that already saw a little bit of play. I think it could see more play moving forward, is Conjuration Tutor. So this is a card that mostly was seen in certain altar lists, and I guess there were some Atronach Mage lists that weren't quite as good as they could have been, but they've recently got some more support. So Conjuration Tutor shuffles 3 Lava Atronachs into your deck, and whenever you summon an Atronach, summon a copy of it in the other lane. So there is that new legendary action. I think it's a legendary action. It might be an epic action that costs 7, but if you have a creature with 5 or more power, it either summons a random Atronach, or if you have a creature with 5 or more power, I believe it is, you summon a Lava Atronach. So being able to summon a Lava Atronach for sure is already a very, well, not super powerful, but a pretty powerful action. And being able to take that forward, being able to summon 2 of them for 7, could potentially be a very, very powerful play. There's also other Atronach synergy that we got in this expansion. There's the 2-cost Exalt creature that exalts 4 and summons a Flame Atronach. So it's even flat cost, but if you can exalt and summon 2 Flame Atronachs, that card all of a sudden becomes quite better. So I don't necessarily think this will make its way into a ton of decks, but I think Altar decks are going to remain good. Altar Telvanni looks like it could be really good, so this card may see even more play, especially as you need more 6-drops or something to combo with that Path Mage. And I think some sort of either mid-rangey or slow Atronach deck is getting close to having... It probably have to be 2 colors for now, but it's getting close to having the resources to be kind of like a thing. So I think having 2 or 3 possibly quality deck types that could run this card could take it from being a occasional altar card that you see to being maybe a staple in some Telvanni altar lists, if not some more 2-color lists as well as some more Atronach lists. This is probably one of the weaker feeling cards I have in terms of confidence level. And I probably easily could have replaced this with something like a Battle Reef of Dusk and a Dagoth deck, but I think Conjuration Tutor could see even more play moving forward. So the next card I wanted to talk about is a card we've already talked about before that went away, became garbage, and I think could be decent again. And that card is Praetorian Commander. So this card used to be completely bonkers. The buff used to be +2/+2. People used to blink this card all around, make their deck crazy. And it was a really unfun deck to play against, and this card wound up getting nerfed to +1/+1. But now that we have kind of hand buff being a thing, Caius' Machinations, we have some more deck buffs becoming a thing. Then we have cards like, again I mentioned Rowley, the Oduranin Sorcerer that summons a creature with power less than that creature from your discard pile. There is that 4-cost 2/3 Exalt willpower creature that destroys a creature with power less than him. It's becoming more and more beneficial to buff things in your deck and kind of use them. And again, we also have all of these 5 power matters cards, and this card will take all of your 4 power creatures and have them become 5 power matters trigger cards. So this card, I think, has way more flexibility and more use than it used to. This used to just be stat buff on a stick, But now there's more cards that care about stat synergy that I think this card it could become more powerful. And then as well, with all the different methods of hand buffing and deck buffing, it's potential that maybe this card eats up a couple rallies in a slower rally deck. Then maybe you drop a 6-cost 5/5 that gives everything in your deck +1/+1. And that's way less shitty than a 3/3 with the same effect. I don't know if this card will ever be revived, and I think maybe how hard the nerf hit it could be just kind of enough for people to stay away from it for a while, just kind of just because of the bad memories of the card, and when something gets nerfed hard, people tend to kind of just forget about it forever. But I think there is potential for this card to become useful again in the right decks, in the right hands, but I think this card definitely became better this expansion. So next card I have on my list, we're going to Agility. It's a 3-cost card, and if I'm being honest with you, I think this card was already pretty decent. The card is Feasting Vulture. I think this card was already viable and probably not played as often as it should just because of how often cards are trading for the board. Triggering this card's effect is not super difficult. And if you get a 3-cost 5/4, that's really good stats for the cost. And it's a conditional cost, but it's a very easy condition to meet. And one that you're commonly doing on turn 2, turn 3 as you're fighting for the board. Even if you kill off your own creature trying to trade into something or set up a better trade for next turn, that still triggers this card's effect. So I think this card was already good enough to be in a lot of lists before. It just never kind of made the cut. But now, since you need to fill out your curve in these 75-card decks, you're going to want more 2- and 3-cost cards that you weren't necessarily running before to kind of smooth out your curve a little bit to make up for the lack of consistency of your draw. So I think Feasting Vulture could be a fine inclusion for that. And I also think now the +2/+2 effect, it goes to a 5/4. So now this is one of the cheapest 5 Power Matters creatures in the entire game, and unlike the Corpus Disease or whatever it is, the 0/1 Corpus that becomes a 5/1 on your turn, this card has actual stats backing it up and it only costs 1 more. So I think this card becomes really good in 5 Power Matters decks, really good as a mid-range curve filler in any green running tricolor deck, and we've gotten slightly more animal support. I don't think that's quite there yet. But if that sees more of an uptick, this is a very quality animal that you could be running in the early game as well. I think Feasting Vulture will definitely see more play. I think it's more of a matter of people just haven't found the right home for it yet to really let it shine how powerful it really is. So the next card we're going to go to is a similar vein to Feasting Vulture, although I don't think it's quite as good. It's going to be Elder Centaur. So the problem with Elder Centaur is it's a 5-cost card that dies to Lightning Bolt. And as a player base, I think we are instantly scared of cards that cost 4 or more that die to Lightning Bolt. So I think that's one of the biggest things holding this card back. But the bright side of it, again, I'm highlighting a lot of 5 Power Matters cards because we've got a lot of 5 Power Matters cards and they all have pretty powerful effects. So having your deck full of synergy for that is a pretty good thing. And the other good thing about this card is with his ability, after he attacks, you give him cover. That means it's harder for your opponent to trade into this card to remove one of your 5 power cards from the board. And those decks tend to be not necessarily always completely aggressive, but more on the aggressive side. So getting something on the board to almost guarantee you have a 5 Power Matters creature on the board unless your opponent uses hard from hand removal, that's already good for enabling all the synergies in your deck. As well as if your deck's going to be a little on the aggressive side, almost guaranteeing you have a 5 power creature on the board every turn as long as your opponent doesn't guard it up or remove it, that's pretty good for your deck as well. Now, if this card's stats were flipped and it was a 4/5, would it see some more play? Possibly. But I don't think it's too hard to buff this card either to make it more playable and to get that health out of the 4 health range, or I think it could be a pretty good card in a lot of decks. I don't necessarily think this card will kind of like burst on the scene and resurge as this amazing new card, but I do think that this card has enough different synergies that it plays into where we can see this more often. So next card I've got is a card, probably the most commonly played card out of this list. So this card already saw a decent amount of play, not a ton. It was really only in mainly one deck, and that card is Wrath of Sithis. 6 costs 5/6, your opponent's cards cost 1 more. Next turn, this card saw a decent amount of play in a lot of mid-sorcerer lists. I don't think it ever quite made the mid-warrior list. So mostly just one deck that this card was played in for the most part. I'm sure it was sprinkled into other decks from time to time, but it never really became a mainstay in anything besides a period in mid-range Sorcerer. And I think this card is pretty decent again. Again, at turn 6, you kind of want better stats or a better ability, but your opponent's card costing 1 more can be very, very powerful for kind of offsetting the multiple creatures your opponent was going to play, or the one big creature they were setting up. I think it could make a pretty decent fit into a lot of maybe some sort of mid-range Tribunal deck. I don't know exactly what deck this card is going to want to go in, but there's so many different, like, not quite combo decks, but like combo synergies in between a lot of the new decks that are popping up. Being able to kind of wreak some havoc on your opponent's turn and kind of throw them into disarray, or maybe even completely remove their ability to play anything on that turn, I think could be a very powerful effect. And with the greater deck size, you're going to need to kind of fill out some more cards like I've been talking about. So this card that may have been almost good enough but not quite before may be good enough to make it into your 75-card deck. And I think disrupting your opponent like that could be very powerful and probably very worthwhile. Next card we're going to talk about, also an Endurance. I think this is another card that probably qualifies for played a decent amount, but I don't think it was quite played a ton. So if any card from this list was played enough to not qualify for the list, it would probably be this one. And that card is Mummify. Usually Mummify was just thrown in to a purple deck that doesn't have a decent amount of prophecies, or a good amount of prophecies, or kind of like oh shit buttons. So you'd kind of throw in Mummify to a lot of those decks. And like I said, I think Mummify was played a decent amount. So I would probably, if gun to my head, I might cut this card from this list as not seeing a ton of play. But I also think this card was underplayed enough to where it can at least be talked about on this list. So again, you're going to want lower curve cards to help your draw consistency with these 75-card decks. And another thing that you can do with a 75-card deck to try and make up for some of the craziness is add some more prophecies to try and help you come back a little bit if your draw is inconsistent from that increased variance of draw of having the 75 cards. Prophecies can kind of mitigate that a little bit, although not very much. But also the more important thing is we've seen a ton of super powerful creatures be introduced in Houses of Morrowind. So if your opponent has something like a Vivek up, and you don't have any way to remove him very easily, Mummify, bam. Or if they get like the Vivek Almalexia combo, and you had a mostly creature-based deck, you can't trade into Almalexia to remove that effect. Mummify, bam, you don't have to worry about the Exalted being immune anymore. And that's like Dagoth a lot of the other 5 Power Matters cards that kind of buff themselves up, maybe something that's super high rallied. There's so many good Mummify targets on this expansion that I think it went from a card that was kind of, I don't want to say on the fringe of playability, but playable, but probably cut from a lot of decks, to a card that probably is much more quality in more decks than it used to be before. So previously you could just kind of do something like I'll throw in a Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt's always better than Mummify for the most part. Even my opponent's 10, 12 cost creature, I can do a trade plus a Lightning Bolt to set up that trade. Now I think Mummify is becoming even better for a lot of that stuff, and I think you could see Mummify a ton moving forward if some of these exalted powerful creatures gain even more popularity. So the next card I wanted to talk about is a card that used to be pretty popular, but back before Journey to Sovngarde got nerfed, and that is Tullius's Conscription. So Tullius's Conscription used to see a lot of play in any kind of slower deck. Running Journey, you'd play Journey, run a Tullius, ton of your big bomb cards become 2 cost or less, and you flood the board with them, and usually you just win the game if your opponent didn't have a board clear. Now Tullius's Conscription doesn't quite make that cut, and it's kind of fell out of favor in most decks. I think you can kind of consider running it in its normal form in something like an Altar deck with Journey, because it's still probably decent. But even still, Tullius's Conscription doesn't see as much play, or nearly as much play as it used to. But I think Tullius's Conscription is fantastic for something like a 75-card deck, where you're maybe running 5 different 2-drops, maybe even 6, 7, 8 different 2-drops in your deck, depending on the curve, possibly even more. As you're getting into the late game, this card can be kind of a flood the board scenario, thin your deck. So I think there's going to be a decent amount of decks that I don't think this becomes a 3 of in a lot of decks. I think this card can become a 1 or 2 of in some of these slower lists that kind of want to clear their deck out, kind of try drawing some of their late game, try and reduce and or minimize the chance of top decking like a 1 or 2 drop in the late game where you could really wind up kind of losing from that point on. I think Talys's Conscription can find its way into a lot of our 3-color decks, and I think not quite a resurgence, but I think you'll see it kind of taking on what I believe the developer's original desire or goal for this card was. I don't think they really envisioned the Journey Talus combo, or it being as popular as it was maybe. I think their original goal was kind of a deck thinning, board flooding mechanic, so I think this card could kind of see a little bit of a comeback for that. And then the final card of this list is a card that I think is super cool, a card that's always been on the fringe of playability, but never quite made the cut, and that is Skywatch Vindicator, 6 cost, dual color, 4/4, summon effect, either deal 2 damage to an enemy creature, or give a friendly creature +2/+2. So everybody likes to compare this card to Shearpoint Dragon. Shearpoint Dragon is just kind of strictly better because it has a curse effect which bypasses ward, and it has dragon synergy, so it also has the effect of enabling other curses and stuff like that. So Shearpoint always, or almost always, is better. But Skywatch Vindicator does have pretty powerful effect. It's got some flexibility. It can give itself the buff, so it could be just a 6 magic, a 6/6 if that's what you need. You could buff a friendly creature for a little bit of reach. It's got a Firebolt on a stick at a cheaper cost than that 1/3 Exalt creature. And it's always been that kind of card where it's almost good enough to include in some mid-mage lists, but never really made the cut there either. I think as we're expanding to some 75-card lists, you're going to want to include some cards like this if you're running something mid-range or even slightly more aggressive. I think Skywatch Vindicator can make the cut as a flexible 6-drop, and if you ever run something like Ulfric's Uprising, this card becomes even better because the dual summon effect, you can choose both times, so you can cast Ulfric's Uprising with a board of assuming other summon effects, give this card +4/+4, or give it +2/+2 and deal 2 damage, or deal 4 damage, or deal 2 damage to different creatures. It's so flexible, and I think in 75-card decks, having cards that can fill multiple roles or do multiple things kind of helps you overcome some of that consistency issue that you might run into in a 75-card deck. So having cards, in my opinion, again, I haven't really built a ton of 75-card decks yet, and I don't think we really have a ton that have kind of settled in the meta yet, but I think one of the most valuable things you can have in a deck like that is flexibility and kind of being able to stand up on your own as a decent card, but also being able to do multiple different things to support depending on what kind of cards you drew that game. So that's it for my list. Let me know if you guys agree, disagree, what cards you guys would include on the list, stuff like that. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. We'll review some of your thoughts in an upcoming episode of the Sideboard. And let me know what you guys think of videos like this. If you guys want to see more stuff like this moving forward, it definitely can be done. And if you have any topics for other top 10s, top 5s, or whatever you guys might want to see moving forward, let me know down below in the comment section as well. But that's going to be it for now, guys. As always, thank you all very, very much for watching. I'm DragonTamerBlayde, and I'll see you guys next time.